that's something that brings us together in a real connection, is
Yeah, it
passion.
leads to collaboration.
It leads to collaboration. Absolutely. An essential word in the artist vocabulary.
Yeah.
But again, vulnerability. And I would also argue that opening up and sharing what you're passionate about is an act of vulnerability. So many
Agreed.
people are afraid to share what they're passionate about. If you want to live, if you want to bring artistry into your life, begin sharing with people what you're passionate about.
This is Way of the Artist with Brandon Colby Cook and Evan Schulte,
Identifying your blocks and demystifying your struggles,
so that you can claim your own path
and make your life a work of art. Brandon, you and I, we have done this many times before. We've sat down to have a conversation. We've come together to connect on things.
Come on.
Yes, folks. What a beautiful setup. If I do say so much.
Oh, just epic. One of your best.
Oh yeah. Just off the top of my head, man. That's what years and thousands of dollars of actor training gets you, people. Is you can come up with doozies like that just on a whim. Hello, everybody. Welcome. It begins and ends with connection. This topic just kind of, at least for me, it came out like a bat out of hell. Like, it was just like, holy shit. I was just writing up a bit of a journal, which anybody, it's a good practice, but if you're an artist, journaling is definitely something you may want to consider making a regular practice. But I was journaling, and suddenly I was just overcome with just how powerful and pervasive and important, how simple and yet challenging this idea, this reality of connection is in our lives. And we had some issues coming up with the title for this one, because it would have been easy to just say everything is about connection. But that just didn't sound too exciting to say that. So here we are. It begins and ends with connection. I'm excited to get into this conversation. How about you, Brandon?
I'm always excited about these. Almost always. There's the odd one where I'm like, I don't know. But it always seems to work out. I think with connection, it's kind of a secret sauce. It's one of those things that kind of gets taken for granted, and you don't realize that it is kind of everything. And I think about that with business and with art and with love, romance and all that stuff, friendship. Connection is really the key thing. It's like that key magic ingredient. And it's so kind of simple, but it's also so easy to forget. And I think what I'm kind of interested in getting into today is what actually is connection, and are there different kinds of connection, and maybe just kind of investigating how that works and how we get disconnected. Because I feel like that's also a big topic that's going on right now, with COVID and all the bullshit that's going on in the world right now, with all this divisive stuff of people saying they're trying to help, but they're actually separating each other. And we get more and more disconnected. And I think that it's really important to find connection that's rich and fulfilling and meaningful. And sometimes I think it's very important that it's mutual, although not always necessary. And I kind of want to get into like where is the heart of this thing that we're talking about. So I don't know the answer to that, but I am excited about that, Evan.
Yeah. I'm sure that this is probably a topic that could be explored and mined endlessly. because connection, the word is everything. Like everything, drawing connections to things is that's everything. Everything that we can observe, everything that we can feel, everything, like there's no end to which you will continue to find connections. And you mentioned the situation that we are still in the world at the time of this recording, which is almost a year, at least where we are, since pretty much things went into lockdown. We're approaching on 1 year. And, we were commenting on how, before we started recording, how it's bizarre that this whole situation has made us so aware of how connected we all actually are, while at the same time, we have never felt more disconnected as well. And in some ways, I think it's that sort of the pain of that, how disconnected we feel, that is actually pointing to just how connected we all actually are. So, that's kind of on a macro level. And I think that there's so many ways that we can go into this one. We can explore it on that big level, but we can also explore it on a smaller scale as well, and see how, I'm interested in seeing how we can find practices of connection. How do we connect truly and authentically? Because that's a question that is of primary concern to any great artist or creative person. Connection is at the heart of everything. So, just to flesh this out, for example, you and I, we've come from acting backgrounds. We've done a lot of other things too, but we met each other through acting. And it's one of those funny things to me where actors, you'll see them after a performance and they're either kicking themselves because they weren't connected or they felt disconnected. Like it's the ultimate tragedy of acting is when you're disconnected. On the flip side, you'll see actors just floating on cloud 9 when they were just like, holy shit, I felt so connected. This quality, this feeling of being connected to your partner, to this scene, to this thing that was happening. It creates a feeling within you, whether you were or you weren't. And I think that that's such an interesting thing. And I know that that's something that parallels into other art forms as well. So maybe that's kind of a good jumping off point for us.
I think the feeling part of it is important. I don't know. It's one of those things. It's like it's easy to get into the whole the thought of it all. But yeah, connection is a feeling thing. It's at the end of the day, I think, when you're creating something as an artist, actually feeling it is kind of what would make someone say, well, I'm connected, because I can feel it. If you're just thinking about it, you're not necessarily connected. And I think that someone who's being really honest about their process, they probably wouldn't say they were that connected just because they cognitively understand, and I think that kind of goes for person to person connection. It's like when you feel connected to somebody, it's literally, it's a feeling, like you feel connected. It's like, you might be like, yeah, we were connecting, but feeling connected, that's, I think, the thing that really matters. And I think that at the end of the day, we're feeling beings, and it's the feelings that matter, to us. And I think that, it's weird because it's like trying to take a thought and describe a feeling is very difficult to do, because every time you do it, you don't do justice to the feeling. So I just said, I think, like, several times here, and I know that's the trap of this. It's not a thought. Connection, you know you're connected because you know you're connected in your body. It's you know it because you felt it. You know it because that feeling was real for you. And if that feeling wasn't real, then you wouldn't say I was connected. And the mystery is, why do we have that feeling, and how do we get to that feeling, and where does that come from? And that's kind of the heart. That's the thing that I'm most interested in. Yeah. So, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
So when we got into this conversation, well, I was curious, what is connection for you? Because this obviously, like, it hit you, but what is it for you?
Well, that's a very broad question. I mean, the thing that hit me about it was something very specific today. But as for the question of what is connection, that's something that I have a kind of resistance to even define it, or to even try to define it. I could say connection is everything, but that doesn't seem to be very good, does it? That's such an unsatisfying answer. That's such an unsatisfying statement. You know, it doesn't encapsulate just how powerful connection is, this thing of connection. I guess for me, connection is life. Connection is life. Connection is love. Those are also very broad things to be saying about it, but it really is where something happens to a certain extent, you know. And you were talking about this as a feeling, and definitely as artists, the mind of the artist is almost always more concerned with the subjective than with the objective, more concerned with what is possible, with what we experience and feel, and than necessarily hard literal truths. Not at a complete absence of, but it seems to be more of concern to the artist to deal with the subjective. But we can even look at the material world. We can even look at the objective, measurable side of life to see that there's kind of a connection between that objective and subjective component with this thing of connection itself. If you take any piece of, electronics that you maybe have in your house, like your TV. Your TV is nothing without that connection to the power, to that electricity. And that electricity is just blind forest without somewhere to go. But between that connection between the two of them, something happens. Suddenly, light and color and image and things happen there that couldn't happen just on their own. You know what I mean? So connection is life in this way, just as connection happens when you go out on a date with that person who just makes your heart just beat faster and your stomach flutter. That's a connection of some kind that's going on there. That's life that's happening. So maybe that is my long roundabout way of answering this. Took the scenic route, but sometimes I have to do that. Sometimes I have to talk it out in order for me to come to some kind of an answer that I feel okay with, and to give context to it. But I would say that, like, connection is life. Connection is life, and is probably the simplest way I can define it.
I like it. I like the analogy or the comparison that you brought in about the TV and the electricity. I think that's really good. It's more than the sum of its parts, and I think that's why it's the magic. We watch television or movies, and we watch these great pieces of art. Sometimes not so great, but we watch them, and it's pretty incredible. but there's a magic that has to come together of connection between various things for that to happen. And yeah, life is like that. Like a great life is that magic connection. And I think when you go to like the romantic side of it or a friendship side of it, you know, you're hanging out with somebody and you start to realize that around them you're the best person that you've ever been. And there's something about them that's like you're the TV and they feed you the electricity, you know, and it's that great scene partner, you know, when you're acting. It's this, and that connection, it what it creates isn't always known. And I think that's why it's so spectacular. And I think that there's also, you know, bad connection. You know, there's these connections that they're, I mean, as skilled as you are, there are people who, for example, are just very disconnected and they won't connect. And they, whether they're doing it purposely or not, and I think a lot of the time it's not purposeful, it's actually just being in a glaze, like just being in a kind of daze of life and being so focused on what you're doing and stuff like that that you forget to connect, or you're not open to it and you just miss, you know, it's all these missed opportunities. But connection is, that's why I say, you know, sometimes you need a willing party and sometimes you don't. Sometimes you just come across somebody and they're not trying to do anything, they're just doing them, and for whatever reason you're doing you, and for whatever reason those two things together make magic, you know. And I think when we connect with someone like that, we're like, wow, this is my new best friend, or this is my soulmate, or this is, you know, my partner, this is awesome. And I think that sometimes it's a matter of the cosmos, you know, and if you want to, I'm saying it metaphorically, but like the cosmos of everything just kind of come together, and it's just the right thing at the right time in the right way, and then boom, that connection is just there. You didn't have to try. And those are the things that I feel like a lot of us are chasing all the time. But I also think that connection can be created and it can be encouraged. But I'm not sure if everybody has good skills on how to do that, or even a knowing on how to do that. I know that I didn't really figure it out with writing until I want to say like several years ago. And then I really started to figure it out. And I was like, oh, this is what it's like. Because everything up until then was kind of connected, but kind of not. And then when I finally actually got connected to something I was writing, it is life, because it had a life of its own at that point. And then, you know, you get that connected to something, and then you're like, can I ever do it again? Can I ever be that connected? Right? Like, because connection is magical. You know, it's almost like chasing the white dragon. It's just, will I ever be there again? And when you are, I mean, I feel like that's what love feels like, you know, connection on that profound magical level. But I think your answer was great, because yeah, it's more than the sum of its parts. I think that's kind of one of the key tenets of this whole conversation, is that you don't know what it is, but you know what it is when it happens. And
sometimes when it doesn't happen.
And when it doesn't happen. I mean, if you're aware enough to even recognize that you're disconnected. Because I think that's another thing. I don't think everybody knows they're disconnected, you know, and I don't think you and I and every person, I just think our culture doesn't always encourage it. And I don't think we always have mentors or teachers, or, you know, the school system isn't always pushing us that way. And I think there's a lot of missed opportunity. But when connection becomes something that you're after, something that you want, something that you value, I think you can find more and more of it, and you can nurture it and grow it and expand upon it.
I think a lot of what you've been commenting on and saying, you know, for one, there's this element in which you're touching on that, like, well, connection happens with more than just other people. You know, like we've been talking a lot about it with others. But you mentioned as a writer, you know, sometimes there's not another person, but you're connecting with something else. You're connecting to an idea. You're connecting to a spark of some kind that has come out of wherever the hell it comes from. You know, but there are those days when you're sitting down writing something and you feel connected to something, and there are days that you don't, you know, and I think that that's an important thing for us to bring in that connection works in so many different ways. And for some of us, we have stronger connections to some things than we do with others. There are certain areas of our lives where we are maybe not as connected as some other people are in certain ways. And, you know, that's a completely natural and wonderful part of life. It's part of what gives everybody sort of their unique flavor in the world, and where people have something really wonderful to give, potentially. But yeah, there was something, there was somewhere else I wanted to go with this as well. But I think we do know when, a lot of the time, when we're connected or disconnected, you know, because we use that language all the time. We talk about this stuff all the time. Like, you know, you're in a relationship with somebody, or like a romantic relationship with someone, or maybe not even, maybe you're looking for a romantic relationship with somebody, and you go out on a date, and it's like, oh, you know what? We didn't connect. You know, like there was no connection. You know, and I've been married for a few years now, and been in a relationship with this person for, you know, close to 10 years now. And there are times when we'll say to each other, it's just like, I just feel disconnected from you right now, you know, and we acknowledge that, and as a thing of like, oh, hey, okay, let's get connected, you know, because there's some recognition that that's important. You know, there's some inherent part of us that recognizes how important that is. And I think that that's something very interesting and extraordinary about who we are. And I might be going down into a bit of an esoteric territory with this, but I'm going to do it because I just love to do it. But we're all, as individuals, I would say, plagued with this feeling of being separate, of being alone. And we have this sense of separation because, you know, we're all these individuals going about in the world. We have our bodies that seem to be separate from the world and from other people. And yet, if you look at sort of the human spirit, even if you don't want to look at it that way, even at human behavior, just look at how much everything we do is about connection, how much we strive and push for it, you know, how much we crave it, you know, by finding that relationship, maybe in a romantic partner, or maybe in discovering that purpose, discovering that gift that we have to give to the world. That's all connection. Going out for a walk in nature, connection. You know, internet connection. Like so much of our technology. I'm like, the way that came out was funny. I agree. Internet connection, phone connection.
It's everything.
It's everything. Connection. But truthfully, you know, as much as we joke, it's like, and in art, like it's everything you realize that we're doing. There seems to be this indomitable. Am I saying that right? I can't say this right now. But this force that is within each and every one of us and within us as a humanity, that's just reaching out all the time. Everything we're doing is reaching out. How do we connect? How do we connect? How do we connect? In all kinds of ways. Again, in the big and little ways, we're finding connections. We're finding connections all the time. And I find that so interesting that that's just a pattern that we have. That's just something that we do innately. We seek it. We seek it out. We search for it. We grab onto it. We crave it. Despite all of this sort of, I guess, seeming evidence to the contrary, that we are just kind of these islands, that we're all just these islands, floating about on our own. And yet we defy that at every turn.
A lot of things are coming up for me as far as where to comment on all of that. And I want to say a few things. One is the quality of connection, I think, is important for all of us. And that goes for everything. I mean, the quality of your internet connection, the quality of your phone connection, but the quality of connection is a huge thing. It's like, we want it to be good. We want it to be strong. That's an important part of it. And the stronger it is, the more intense it is, the better it is, the more clear, the more, just there with it, and connection, I think, has a big relationship to projection, because you can get really connected to a character or another person or something because you project yourself into it. And that our ability to put ourselves into other people's lives and other situations is one of the profound ways in which we connect with each other. We draw a lot of empathy and compassion and sympathy for each other through these things. And the stronger it is, often the better the person feels who actually received it, because the stronger the empathy and the care and the, and all of these things, they're all so related. One of, I think, the interesting things about projection is that you can be connected to something or someone that's not good, that's bad, that's toxic, but you can put yourself in, and I'm not saying like they're toxic as a human being, and although I don't know, honestly, maybe. For me, the argument on that is out. I don't know. You hear me a lot on this podcast. I'm just going to say this because I feel like it's something I've been thinking about a lot. I'm always like, rah, 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 people are great. And I say that on this podcast all the time. I honestly just have to say, I don't know if all people are good. I don't know if there's some bad apples in the mix that like they just born with a fucked up brain, or they're just too far gone. I honestly don't know. And my honestly, like, I want to be like, everybody's a human who just kind of went a little astray. I don't know if I think that anymore. I honestly think some people might be fucked up from the get-go, and they're just thrown into the mix of this crazy world that we live in. And they're not going to go anywhere because it's just part of life. But I think that making room for that might be healthy for us. But regardless, I want to say that because I feel like you can get really connected to a person that's very toxic. And it's important to understand projection, to see that sometimes you're connected not to them, but yourself in them. And that's a big difference, because I have felt love for people who, in my opinion, are quite toxic. And when I look at them objectively as people, I don't want nothing to do with them. In fact, I'd want to be disconnected from them. But when I look at the love that I felt for them, they reflected something good. And I think even a toxic person or a person in a toxic place can reflect good. And I think that that's the part that I struggle with sometimes, because sometimes projection can make you feel connected to something and think that that thing is good because you see the good of you in it. And I think that I want to put this out in the world because I feel this is a very important part for artists to know and just people to know in general, is that just because you are finding the good in you in something does not mean that that thing is good, does not mean that that thing is not bad. And we need to have that ability to see that connection has more to do with us than it does with the other person. I talked earlier about how you can have that friend or that partner that you just have that magic connection with. And I think that's wonderful. But I also think that both people need to recognize that the magic you're feeling is because of a projection of yourself into them, and you're granting them that. But if they no longer are healthy for you or good for you, you might need to actually disconnect that, even though it might feel good to be around them. And I want to say one last thing just to further this point home. There's a lot of other things I wanted to talk about, Evan, but I'm just going to focus on this for a moment. I have had friends that, you know, if by all the checks and balances, you would probably say were narcissists, meaning that their whole world revolved around them entirely. And I really felt like I'll think of one for example, I really feel like this person really cared about me. And I really felt like we were really close friends. But when you look at down to brass tacks and you kind of go, the thing is they had qualities that I liked, that I wanted. They had charisma, they had confidence, they had the ability to just get a room focused on them. I loved that. I thought that was really cool. But when it came to care, when it came to actually like nurture, when it came to friendship, there's a lot of missing gaps and the cost of that. So I learned a lot from these people. I learned how to be charismatic. I learned how to be, kind of the better qualities of narcissism, but also I got some of the bad sides of it. And, I think the problem when you're connected to somebody who's in a narcissistic state, let's just say that, it's not that they don't care about you. It's that they only care about themselves. And we're all a little bit narcissistic, but too much, I only care about myself, can be toxic to you and a lot of other people. And I just think we're venturing into a world where psychology is more evident and we're more aware of the complexities. And so as important as connection is, I feel like I want to put that warning sign out there for that minefield that does exist. Because just because you feel good about it, just because you feel connected, doesn't mean it's healthy and doesn't mean it's okay to stay connected to it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we could take that down a philosophical rabbit hole of, then, well, what is that connection about? Because there's still a connection of some kind, even whether it's for good or for ill, and for what reason that is, and for how that came to be and why that came to be, in your life is, that's a whole can of worms to get into. But absolutely. I want to say as well, like, just in sort of reference to your comment on, maybe some people are just kind of like shit people, they're just from the get-go. And I have no idea. I can't answer that. Yeah. Maybe not. Normally it's like, it's usually a more complicated situation than we might assume, but it makes me think of, there's this Hawaiian practice known as Ho'oponopono. And in the culture, it was this recognition that in their societies, like, there were people who were disturbed and even, destructive, and people who maybe had to not be a part of the community because they posed a danger, to people. We that's something we recognize in our society. It's like there are people who pose a danger to others, and despite how you think of how we handle that and where we could do better to deal with that is another matter. But in the culture of the Hawaiians, Ho'oponopono is a recognition that in their beliefs that these people have essentially taken on all of the unresolved, all of the anger and fear and all of the negative things that society has not dealt with within themselves. That these people essentially have just come into the world to bear that burden for the rest of us. And so Ho'oponopono, I might get this a little bit mixed up, but it essentially means thank you, please forgive me. No, thank you, I'm sorry, please forgive me, I love you. Saying essentially, thank you for taking this on, to thank you for taking on all of the shit that I'm not willing to deal with in myself. Thank you. I'm also sorry for that I have done this to you. Please forgive me for that, and I love you. And there's some really interesting studies that have been done on Ho'oponopono practitioners, and what kind of interesting results that have happened as a result of people who've practiced that. But bringing this back around, if you think about what that is, that's all a practice of connection. Still at its core, you're recognizing that you're connected to that disturbed person in some way, and finding a way to transmute it in a way that you can maybe find some kind of understanding, maybe find some sense of compassion for what's going on. That's a bit of a side note, but you were kind of bringing up in general maybe some of the darker, shall we say, the some of the shadowy sides of connection. Because yeah, of course, like connection works in all kinds of different ways. And one way that I wanted to actually talk about this in this conversation when we entered into it was, in our society, in our culture, we have a pretty strong obsession with success. And we're willing to do all kinds of crazy and unhealthy things in that pursuit of some idea of success that we have, whether that is fame or wealth or possessions, what have you. And I guess this has to do with like the things that we're willing to do to get there. Because especially in the art world, like in the film industry, they're just like, it's like, oh, it's all about who you know. Right. And same thing within business. And a lot of times you hear people talk about, it's just like, oh, well, you have to be connected. You've got to be connected, and there's this way that connection is talked about in that context that I want to address here, because yes, there is an acknowledgement of connection, but the acknowledgement of it is in a very superficial way. And I would dare say even an almost sociopathic context in which it's looked at, where it's like you're looking at, you're going and you're meeting new people, you're going out and meeting different people who, out of a sense of, well, they will go and they will get me something. It's all very much a self-serving kind of endeavor. And I don't see that as being real connection, or at least it's not. It's only a partial connection. It's missing some of the components that I would say are key for a genuine connection. Because something we were talking about before we started recording was that you can't fake it. You can't fake real connection. You might have people in your life, in your circle or circles, because we usually have many. And there's probably a good chance that you have a few people in your circles who you do not have a real genuine connection with them. It's not to say that you have to have that with everybody, but we all can acknowledge when it's not really all that authentic. It's not really all that genuine. You know, there's some other motivation that's behind that connection. And I think that is a huge kind of mistake. It's like a distortion of what we're talking about, what it really means to be connected to somebody, because it's always, there's some sort of an end result. There's something that you're looking to get out of it, as opposed to a genuine connection. And I think that's something important to talk about.
You bring up something really good. I think especially for people going into the film industry, I mean, which I've been intimately involved in, that there is you'll meet a lot of people. You know, you work on a movie alone, work on a show, so many people you meet. There's so many departments, and then even in those departments, there's so many people. And you know, you get involved in stuff, there's so many people you'll cross paths with. And if you're in the film industry and you live in LA, I mean, you talk to your waiter, they're probably in the industry. I mean, it's just everywhere, right? So I think that, to not candy coat this thing and to, and to still honor what we're talking about, I think that it's important that we acknowledge that there is a form of people being connected, which is basically I'm using you and you're using me and we're using each other and we're both kind of okay with that. Mm-hmm. And I think when you're in the film industry for a long time, you just become accustomed to that. And as sick and kind of unhealthy as it all is, you just kind of come to learn to expect it. And I think somebody that's experienced and seasoned veteran in the industry starts to learn to just kind of accept that there's a certain amount of usury that goes on. And sometimes you break through the usury and you get real connections, and those you just highly value because you know that so much of it is so vapid and so empty and so much usury. But when you're green and you're new and you're hopeful and you're like, I just want to make films and act and it's going to do a great job and everyone's going to, love that. And you start to realize if you hang in long enough that it's not all beautiful and lovely and great. And there's a lot of fake connection that's going on. And that's not the real connection. And I want to say that it's not the real connection because it feels like you're connected. It seems like you're connected. It looks like you're connected. But you're so disconnected.
In some ways, I'd say you are connected.
Yeah.
But it's in what ways are you connected?
Yeah. But the thing is like when it comes down to that feeling, when it comes down to that, like, hey, like I really have a person here, or I really have a thing here that's real. And I just think that empty connections, these kind of it's like 0 calorie connection, zero nutrient connection, call it that. 0 nutrient connections. They're like, they fill you up momentarily, but they leave you feeling hungrier for it in the end, And I think that the connection that we're really trying to get to and point out is the kind of connection that's that, nutrient rich connection, that thing where you really get connected, you really get to know somebody, they're really getting to know you, or you really get intimately know your craft and you feel a certain kind of bond with it, it's that is the thing that is really rich, that we're really looking for as human beings. But we will settle, I think a lot of us will settle for like 0 nutrient connections, because I think the feeling alone, the feeling of loneliness, it can be so strong in us that we'll settle for things that are I just want somebody to talk to, and that could be, and a good example of that could be like someone you have beers with and you just have beers with them. But it doesn't mean that person you have beers with couldn't be a really strong friend. but you might just only have the friendship and connection of we drink beer together and watch sports together or something like that, right? Or whatever. I'd like to think that you and I, we drink beer together, but we get really connected. We really get to know each other. We talk to each other about what's really going on in each other's lives. We give each other advice, we listen, right? And these things took time to build. We didn't have that day one when we met. And I think that connection, I'm probably just opening up a whole nother bag of worms here.
No, I like the bag though.
Bag, whatever.
I like the bag. I like the bag a lot because this is also something I wanted to talk about, which is, so the question comes up. It's like, okay, so how do you start to form more genuine connections with people? And you mentioned a lot of them, and I'm gonna boil it down as to how I see it, or at least what I'm seeing. We build real connections by sharing passion, by sharing our passion with others, and by being vulnerable with others. That's how real connection begins to happen. And even, kind of going back to what we were saying earlier in just a few minutes ago, even if you have people coming together and they're just doing like a business deal, it's like, oh, that's a good connection for this deal to happen. Well, maybe there's still something that's connecting the two of you. Maybe you're two businesses or two people who have a similar passion to each other. And that's where you connect on. And you go, okay, they're passionate about this. I'm also passionate about this. We don't know each other that well, but the passion is real. We're connected through that mutual passion, and we understand that, and we're going to do something together in that way. So that's something that brings us together in a real connection is passion.
Yeah, it leads to collaboration.
It leads to collaboration, absolutely. An essential word in the artist vocabulary.
Yeah.
But again, vulnerability. And I would also argue that opening up and sharing what you're passionate about is an act of vulnerability. So many
Agreed.
people are afraid to share what they're passionate about. If you want to live, if you want to bring artistry into your life, begin sharing with people what you're passionate about. And suddenly you'll find there's a whole community out there for you. There's a whole ton of people out there who are just want to now connect with you because they're like, oh, you're passionate about that? I'm passionate about that. Let's connect. Let's see what can happen from that, and that's where you can start to form real, genuine connections. It's not like, look, don't get me wrong. I think that because some people are struggle socially more than others, but, I've had people tactic me before with creating connections, whether it's through business or, through certain circles or meetups or whatever it is that I've been to at different points in my life, and just being like, oh, like I see you using something you learned in a workshop on me, like the way that you're interacting with me right now. And I'm like, it's gross. It's bullshit.
You're getting into technique, Evan. We can maybe talk about technique, because this is technique being at the forefront, and it's gross. Yeah, technique at the forefront. Yeah, artists learn this, especially actors, right? It's like, I don't want to see your technique. I want to see you alive in the moment. But when you see the technique, it really robs it, But anyway, sorry, I cut you off, but I just thought, a segue at some point.
Yeah, no, and it's interesting how that has made its way. I didn't think that was something that was going to make its way into this conversation, but it's there. It is.
Yeah. Yeah, you feel like you're being sold, or you feel like you're being hoodwinked or tricked or manipulated, or and we have a sense for that, and some of us not as much as others, because maybe not as in touch with it. But nothing feels worse than being like, you got another agenda here, and you're not being fully honest.
Yeah. And we pick up on that, and the only times, like, and you've already touched on it, Brandon, is that will fly is sometimes we're in a space where we're just, we're in such a lonely space, to put it bluntly, that, we'll just take that connection out of comfort or out of that kind of longing. And, maybe there's some purpose to that. And maybe it opens up to something bigger. I don't know. I don't want to put any kind of a judgment on it. But I do just want to point it out because, people learn all kinds of tactics, and I don't know, maybe it helps you get your foot in the door. I feel like I'm being maybe too harsh on this whole thing, but I don't know. I just want to comment.
Yeah.
I just want to comment on it because I'm like, I've been in situations where that's happened. And, I suppose I can have more compassion for somebody who has gone through those efforts to try and learn how to connect with people better because obviously they have trouble doing it. Mm-hmm. Right. But it's weird to me that like, this is like, oh, this is how you connect with people. It's like, it's not really how you connect with people. Yeah. Like looking people in the eyes is a good way of helping you to connect with people, but it's not a surefire way of establishing a real connection with somebody. Like a guy I once worked with, he would always look you in the eyes. He was a sociopath 100%. Like the way he looked you in the eyes was just like, there's something going, there's something going on there that I don't like. I'm saying that real connection, you have to go beyond that superficial level. Just like, okay, I'm going to look you in the eyes. I'm going to shake your hand with a firm handshake. Well, maybe not these days right now, but, in normal times when people were shaking hands with each other. But there's vulnerability is required for real connection. And I just kind of think that sharing what you're passionate about, which means you also have to know and be connected to what you're actually genuinely passionate about. In which case, if you don't know what that is, that's your freaking assignment, man. Mm-hmm. You need to start getting in touch with that and connected with that in yourself. But once you're connected with that, that's such a beautiful place where everything flows out from. That everything can flow out from for you. It's just like, hey, I'm passionate about this. And maybe people aren't passionate about the same thing, but as human beings, we admire passionate people. Like, just look at all of I'm obsessed with all of those reality shows that are of like different artists and craftspeople, cooking shows, people blowing glass, people making pottery, people painting, people, making music, whatever it is. Just like, I love hearing people's stories. I love seeing people who are passionate about what they're doing talk about what they're doing or showing what they do and how they think and how they approach something. That passion in somebody else ignites passion in us, no matter what it is, because and that's why I think it's such a beautiful place where you can start from, because it requires a little bit of vulnerability to talk about what you're passionate about, but it doesn't require you telling someone about your deepest, darkest secrets and, your most vulnerable places. It's something that you're sharing with somebody that brings you to life, mm-hmm. And you're inviting them to also bring that out as well.
Yeah. There's a part of sharing, like when you're passionate about something that people aren't necessarily interested in, or they might have not even known existed, but you talk about it and you talk about why you're passionate about it and you get into all that. It allows them to experience it in some ways. Like, I'm really passionate about hiking. It's something that I've been very interested in, and I'm getting brave enough to venture further out into the wilderness. And I guess the vulnerability is sharing that I'm into hiking and also that I'm scared of some shit. Like, fucking, I was up in the mountains on this last one, and the snow was, almost knee height at a certain point. The ice was so thick because it had trickled off the side of the mountain that, like, you just had these massive, like, waterfall ice cascades that were absolutely beautiful. And, and I'm just like, well, I got to a certain point, it got so deep, I was like, okay, I got to turn back. I was also, my jacket, as good as it is, and I was bundled. I had a toque and a scarf and a jacket and gloves and everything, and waterproof boots and all this. And it was just getting too wet, and it was starting to get to that point where the day was getting later, and it's probably going to get darker soon. And I'm just like, okay, I've reached my limit. Like, this is unsafe at this point. Like, no one's up here. Like, I'm the only one at this trail at this point. And as awesome as it is, as the adventurer part of me, like, that's incredible. And I saw stuff, and I showed people some pictures and like some of the stuff that I post online, and they were like, wow, that's so cool. But it's like, I had to go out and do that. But when I talk about it, they might not even be into hiking, but all of a sudden it's like, wow, you're in my world, you're in my little thing. And I don't expect every person I talk to be as connected to that as I am, but they're connected to me through it. And art is like that. You talk about your acting or your filmmaking, your painting or your music or whatever, right? It's like something that comes up for me. I just want to mention it because I feel like it's going to miss if I don't. Something that really comes up for me is self-esteem. Having a strong sense of self-esteem is a really important part of being able to connect with someone else, because you need to have a certain amount of self-acceptance and kind of, I've heard it called like being unapologetically passionate or whatever, like you need to not apologize for the fact that you're interested in something. And maybe it's weird. Like maybe it's like anime or dressing up as like cartoon characters or something, like whatever, like that people think, or collecting action figures, something that you think, oh, everyone's going to judge this. But if you own it and you accept it, and you're like, yeah, I'm into this stuff, people can be like, okay, like, but if you judge it, you actually do yourself a disservice, because you're not going to be able to connect with people, if that's how you treat these things. So I just think self-esteem, and also hanging out with narcissists, something that I did a little bit enough, is low self-esteem, because you're only going to take abuse from people because you don't think highly enough of yourself, right?
Yeah.
So it took me time to actually develop self-esteem, to realize, hey, this is not okay, and to create boundaries and self-respect. But it's just something I feel like, well, yeah, that relates a lot to this. Self-esteem is a big part of connection and getting those real rich connections.
Yeah. I mean, and again, I would say as well too, because like self-esteem can be a tricky thing, like how do you build self-esteem, and there's taking risks that's involved with that. And I would say, what, like, because what in my acting school, Meisner technique, one of the biggest things, especially in the early goings, is like, well, we're going to take the attention off of yourself. And we're going to see what happens when you really learn how to take the attention off of yourself. So maybe I'll rephrase what I said earlier and saying it's like, if you have the self-esteem and the confidence to share what you're passionate about, by all means. But even then, this might even be better, is ask other people what they're passionate about. Get inquisitive about, ask someone, it's like, what are you passionate about? What lights you up? What is your fire? What calls you in this life? What brings you to life? And ask people questions along those lines, and then really listen to them.
Yeah, because it's not all about talking about what you're passionate about.
Yeah.
It's also wanting to know what other people are passionate about.
Yeah.
Or igniting it in them. Maybe they haven't even asked that of themselves.
And people will be so grateful that you ask them that. In my experience, people are usually so thankful and appreciate that opportunity, to actually talk about something that means a lot to them, and really listen. Allow yourself to be caught up in their passion. Allow yourselves to get pulled in to their story, into their, into what moves them. Allow yourself to get caught up in that, and hear them. And it won't take very long for a real genuine connection to start to form, on those lines. Yeah.
Listening. I feel like we haven't spent enough time even talking about it, but I feel like it needs to be mentioned. Listening is such an important part, of this thing we're talking about. I mean, listening, you have two ears and one mouth for a reason. Listen twice as much as you speak, as much as you want to talk, um, and it is important to really listen. Something that I learned through acting when I was younger was whoever you're interacting with, make them the most important person in the world while you're talking to them, while you're connecting with them. And in a way, it's how it is. That really is. They are your only lifeline when you're talking to them. That is your lifeline, them. And when you're acting, your scene partner is your lifeline, right? And if you make it about you, your scene is always going to be a little empty, maybe a lot empty. But when you make it about that person and you really get connected and you really listen and you're really there, that's when a magical thing can happen. But if you don't allow yourself that magic isn't able to happen. And it's not just in acting, it's in life when you're really connecting with someone. And people know when you're listening, they know when you're hearing them. They know it's those, we give a lot of cues. We give a lot of physical, social cues that come off. And I don't think people necessarily mind if they say something and it spurs on a thought for you, but you kind of like center yourself back again. I think people know. I know I talk a lot, and I know sometimes, and it's something I'm working on. I think maybe because when I was a kid, I didn't feel like I was heard enough. So sometimes I just talk and talk and talk. But I know sometimes there's a moment where you're having a thought and you want to say something, but you're being polite and you're not cutting me off. And I know the same thing happens for me every now and then. And I don't think people mind that. I think we allow for that, especially when we go on. But, we need to also create space, after we share, for other people to share and comment, participate. That's important too.
Yeah.
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 Beer.
Beer. We're drinking beer.
We're drinking some beer.
Yes, we are. What have you got? What have you got going on?
Well, I got a Belgian style wheat ale, and this is a classic Rickards White.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I got a tasty little Belgian wheat ale. So, that's what I picked up, and I like it. It's good. I've always liked this beer. I've always found it quite enjoyable. So that's what I'm doing.
Nice. I'm having, I don't know if you can,
Vancouver Island
Brewing, Dominion Dark Lager.
How's that?
It's good. It's actually, we call it a dark lager out here, but on the can it's just like this Schwarzbier. If you want to go to its origins, it's a Schwarzbier, an authentic Bavarian lager. It has aromas of coffee and chocolate and a smooth, clean finish. And yeah, it's good. It's bizarre. It's like drinking a light, bubbly porter. In a way. Yeah. I don't mind because it's got like those kind of rich, like coffee chocolate flavors, but it doesn't have that kind of heaviness that you get from a stout or a porter. It's kind of still got those crisp elements that you get from a lager. So yeah, it's good. It's good. It's kind of like an easy drinking beer that still gives you a little bit of like flavor, especially for these still colder months that we are in right now.
Yeah. I often find those darker beers to be really good in the cold months.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, let's wrap it up. What else have we got to say about this?
Well, let me give my closing thoughts, I suppose, and then I'll pass it on to you. Okay. We talked about a lot of stuff. I want to say that, in these times where, especially right now, we're supposed to be socially distancing in most places and sometimes quarantined and whatever. I mean, it's so easy to feel disconnected. And I think that we can feel disconnected on many, many levels, in many ways. You can feel disconnected, not just from people, but from your art, from your craft, from your goals, from things that you maybe just don't feel like are possible right now. And so I would say that it needs connection needs to be where you look first. And we talked about this kind of even being a title, but like making connection the priority. And I kind of still think that kind of stands, even though we talked about how it starts and ends with it. But it's like, yeah, it's like, if you're in doubt, if you don't know what to do, if you don't know where to go, look at where you can find connection. And maybe that's connection to a friend, maybe that's connection to an interest or hobby. Get yourself connected to something and try to find some passion in there. Try and pull something out that gives you a little bit of excitement or a sense of play or something. And remember that it's not so much the person or the thing that you're connected to. It's what that spark of those two things coming together creates. And you said this earlier in the podcast, and I would leave with this point. It's more than the sum of its parts. It's you get connected to this thing, and it's about what comes out of that. And you don't know what that will be, but that's the thing. And as more of that you can create, more of that magic kind of thing of connection you can find and create, the more you're going to feel kind of alive, I think. And just it's going to give you the life that you're looking for. So I think one connection can lead to more connections, and it can build upon each other. But sometimes if you're totally disconnected, start simple. Just start with something that kind of gets you going down a road. I mean, a while ago, I talked about getting into video game development. I did that. I might get back into it, but I was really passionate for a little bit. But that passion did spark a lot of other interests and opened up a lot of other things. And I kind of knew it was one of those. I kind of knew for me it was going to be kind of like that. Like, it was leading me somewhere. And I feel like connection can kind of be like that sometimes. It doesn't. Sometimes you're like, well, this is silly. Like, why would I be connected to that? Why do I care? It's like, who cares? You care right now. Just go into it, look into it, get interested, get curious. We talk about all this stuff on the podcast. Go down that road, get connected to it, maybe talk to people about it, share what you learn, investigate, and then something will happen. And that might make you interested in something entirely else, or it might connect you to a person you never would have met otherwise. There you go. The story goes on, and that's life.
Great stuff. Well, where does that leave me? I'll you know what? I'll start with another title that we considered for this episode was connection as your foundation. Connection as your jumping off point, which I think is a good place for me to kind of end this up with, because that's sort of where this whole train kind of started for me today, which is, we can get really caught up and lost in trying to look a certain way, appear a certain way, have all of the right systems in place, have all of the right answers in place. And, we can get caught up in all of these material details about many different aspects of our lives, what we're in pursuit of and whatnot. And for me, this realization that it's like, hey, this shit's all about connection. It's all about building real connections with people, seeing if there is a real connection with people, and that's the thing to be interested in more than anything else, is to get interested in that connection, because that's what it all ultimately comes down to. It comes down to us wanting to be more connected to ourselves and to our lives and to life in a deeper way, and wanting to be more connected to others in a more meaningful way. So let's start there. And that's how we came to this the title of this podcast, it starts and it ends with connection. Just look at it for yourself. Look at connection in your own life, how you are connected to the world, how are you connected to others, how what you do is connected to other people, and you will see just how that it continues to go deeper and deeper in so many different ways. It's all connection. It's all connection. So that's where you begin, and that's where it ends.
Thanks for listening to the show. If you got something out of this, if you feel it improved your life or your journey in any way, please take a moment to subscribe, leave a review, or share the episode.
You can also support us on Patreon, where we have tons of great bonuses. You are the ones that make the show possible and help us to thrive. Thank you for joining us.